Welcome to Nightmare Coming, where folklore bleeds into reality. Every story you thought was just a tale has a truth waiting in the dark. One nightmare at a time, we dig deeper into what was left unexplained. If you dare to question what's real like, subscribe and share the story that still haunts you. Then, let's step into tonight's nightmare. I used to think the woods were peaceful, even comforting. There's something about being surrounded by trees that made me feel like I was finally away from everything. No traffic, no neighbors, no noise, just silence. But silence can turn against you when you start to notice what breaks it. That first night of the trip, the silence was all I could think about. My friends were already asleep in their tents, their faint snores mixing with the sound of leaves brushing against each other. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and I stayed up a little longer, just watching the smoke rise. That's when I heard something dragging softly through the dirt, circling just beyond the light. I froze, listening. The sound paused and continued, slower, closer. It could have been an animal. I told myself that a dozen times, but when I finally turned off the flashlight and slipped into my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me to close my eyes. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I woke up to the fabric of my tent shifting. Not the kind of movement wind makes. It was subtle, deliberate, like someone brushing their hand along the side, testing the seams. I held my breath. My heartbeat was loud enough that I thought whoever or whatever was outside could hear it too. The sound stopped. I almost convinced myself I imagined it until I saw the faint shape pressing against the fabric, a small bulge gliding from one corner to another. It moved slowly, then paused right next to my head. I couldn't scream. I just lay there, staring at that slight indentation, waiting for it to go away. It didn't. Instead, the zipper started to move. Not fast, not clumsy steady, cautious, like fingers learning how to open it. I grabbed the zipper from the inside, yanking it back down. I didn't even think. My hands were shaking so badly that I ripped part of the mesh lining. I whispered my friend's name from the next tent over, but there was no response. The sound stopped completely, and for a few seconds, all I could hear was the wind again. I wanted to believe it was over, but when I looked at the fabric, there was another shape now lower to the ground, crawling. Then, just as slowly as it started, it backed away. I could see it through the dim moonlight, filtering through the trees, a shadow moving across the dirt. It stood upright for a second tall, too tall, and then it melted back into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I waited until the first hint of dawn before I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The forest looked normal again, calm. My friends were groggy, half laughing at how pale I was when I told them. They said maybe it was a deer, or the wind, or even a raccoon. I didn't argue. But when I looked at the ground, the tracks were wrong. There weren't hoof prints or paw marks, just long, thin impressions, almost like someone had dragged their fingers through the dirt, tracing circles around the tent. The same circles I'd heard hours before. We packed up that morning, pretending it was because we wanted a better view of the lake. But I knew it was because of me, because I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. Every tree felt like it was hiding something. Every sound felt deliberate. On the drive home, nobody talked much. We just listened to the tires hum against the road, each of us lost in thought. I tried to convince myself it was over, that it had been some strange trick of light and fear. But that night, when I unrolled my sleeping bag to put it away, a small tear near the zipper caught my eye. It wasn't from when I pulled at it earlier. The rip was from the outside, like something had been clawing to get in. Sometimes I wonder if whatever was out there wasn't trying to hurt me at all. Maybe it just wanted me to open the tent. Maybe it wanted me to see it. And every time I close my eyes, I still hear that sound, the slow, steady drag across the dirt, like it's searching for another tent to touch. Story 2. Screams from across the lake. The next campsite we found was supposed to be safer. A family-friendly campground with picnic tables, dock access, and a ranger station just a short walk away. I remember laughing that first afternoon, trying to convince myself that the woods from last time were just bad luck. The lake was huge and still, a perfect mirror of the sky, and for a while I felt normal again. But the thing about lakes, they hold sound in strange ways. By the time night fell, the air was cold and heavy, and I realized how far the sound could travel across that still water. Around midnight, I woke up to a single scream. Not the kind that fades in panic or trails into silence. It was sharp, clean, and cut through the air like a blade. I sat up instantly. My tent was near the edge of the lake, and the sound had come from somewhere across it. My first thought was that someone had fallen in. I unzipped the flap and peeked out. The water was perfectly still. No ripples, no movement, just the moon hanging over the surface like a pale coin. I called out once, my voice low, testing the echo. Nothing came back except a faint, trembling sound, like someone whispering. I woke my friend Mark, who had been dead asleep. He groaned, swore it was probably some late-night prank from another camper. But when we both stood by the water's edge, the whispering grew clearer. It wasn't random noise anymore. It was words, desperate, broken, repeating the same phrase over and over. Help me. We could see faint light flickering across the lake, like a lantern swinging in the dark. Mark grabbed a flashlight and started signaling. The light across the water stopped moving, then blinked back once, twice, 3 times. Morse code, maybe. But before we could figure it out, it vanished completely. We ran to the ranger station, half out of breath. The ranger on duty was an older guy, gruff but kind. He said no one was camping on the opposite side. It was restricted, too close to the old quarry. He promised to send someone to check in the morning, but he didn't seem worried. We didn't sleep again that night. Every so often, I'd hear the faintest echo of that voice. Help me, drifting through the still air, getting quieter each time, until it sounded like it was right behind me. At dawn, Mark insisted on checking for himself. We borrowed a canoe, ignoring the ranger's warning, and paddled across. The water was strangely warm in places, like pockets of trapped air beneath the surface. Halfway across, we found what looked like the remnants of a dock, splintered wood sticking out of the water, blackened by time. When we reached the opposite shore, everything felt wrong. The air was colder, heavier, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The ground was uneven, covered in moss and old boards. And in the mud, near the edge of the trees, were footprints, small, bare ones, leading straight into the water. Mark called out again, his voice cracking the silence. Nothing answered. Then, faintly, the same whisper we'd heard before came back, but this time it wasn't across the lake. It was right next to us. I turned, shining the flashlight toward the sound, but there was no one there. Just the shimmer of light bouncing off the water, and beneath it, movement, something pale drifting below the surface, like fabric caught in a slow current. When I leaned closer, I saw what it was. A hand, small and colorless, reaching up from the lakebed before vanishing again into the murk. We didn't talk during the paddle back. I could barely hold the oar. My hands were trembling so hard, I kept dipping into the water by accident. When we got to shore, the ranger was waiting, looking pale. He said he checked the records. A girl had drowned there years ago, late at night, near the old quarry where swimming was banned. They never found her body, just her camping lantern, still lit, floating in the middle of the lake. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see that pale hand moving under the surface, waiting for someone to reach back. Sometimes, when I think about it, I wonder if she really wanted help at all. or if she just wanted company. Because the last thing I heard before leaving that place wasn't the whisper of help me. It was my own name, faint and trembling, calling from across the lake. Story 3. The Cabin with No Door. After what happened at the lake, I swore I'd never go camping again. But that promise didn't last long. A few months later, my cousin Evan convinced me to join him on a trip deep in the Smokies. He'd found a hidden spot, an old ranger outpost that supposedly had a working fireplace and real beds. The idea of walls between me and the forest sounded comforting, so I went. We drove for hours, winding through empty back roads until the GPS gave up entirely. When we finally found the path, it was half overgrown, lined with trees that bent toward each other like they were trying to keep us out. The cabin looked normal at first glance, small, weathered, but intact. There was even a sign nailed to a tree that said, "Property of Forestry Service." But as we circled it, something felt off. The walls were solid logs, the roof sagging slightly with moss and age. There were 2 small windows, one cracked, one boarded, and a chimney on the side, but no door. Not a single entrance. Just smooth, continuous wood where an opening should have been. Evan laughed, thought it was some kind of prank, maybe a safety shed that had been sealed shut. I didn't laugh. I remember walking all the way around twice, running my hand along the wood, feeling for any seam or frame. Nothing. It was like the whole thing had been built without a way in. Still, when we circled to the back a third time, the air felt colder, heavier. And there, just barely visible behind a tangle of vines, was a handle. Metal, old, rusted. We looked at each other, unsure if it had been there before. Then, without saying anything, Evan pulled it. The door opened inward, slow and silent, revealing nothing but darkness inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell, like old firewood and damp earth. The cabin was one room, maybe 15 feet across, with a stone fireplace, a small table, and 2 beds. Everything was coated in a layer of dust, except one of the beds. The sheets were clean, almost new. There was no sign anyone had been there recently, yet the embers in the fireplace were faintly warm. Evan shrugged it off, said maybe a hunter or ranger had used it recently. But when we tried to leave, the handle was gone, just gone. The door was still there, closed, but the handle had vanished like it had never existed. We tried prying it open with a knife, kicking it. Nothing worked. The wood didn't even flex. Evan said we'd wait it out. Maybe in the morning someone would come by. But the night stretched on too long. Every so often we'd hear a faint knock, not from outside, but from inside the walls. It wasn't random either. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone walking around inside the logs. When I pressed my ear to the wall, the sound stopped. But once, just before it did, I swear I heard breathing, slow, shaky, right on the other side. We tried the windows next. The one in the back was jammed, the other covered in grime. But through the glass, I could see movement, not reflections, not tricks of light. A shadow passing slowly across the clearing outside, back and forth, again and again, like it was pacing. Evan said it was an animal, but animals don't knock. Around 3 a.m., he fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion. I stayed awake, sitting near the fireplace, listening. The embers had died out, but the room still glowed faintly. From what, I couldn't tell. The knocking had stopped, but I felt it. The sense that something was still there, waiting for me to notice it. At dawn, I must have dozed off for a few minutes. When I woke, the light was streaming in through the window. Evan was gone. His sleeping bag, his boots, everything. The door, though, was open again. The handle was back, rusted, dripping water. Outside, the clearing was empty. No footprints, no trail, nothing. I shouted for him until my voice broke. Then I saw something carved into the wood beside the door. It was a name, Evan's name, and a date. That date was yesterday. I ran, following the road until I found the main trail again. When I told the ranger what happened, he gave me a strange look. Sighed there hadn't been a cabin out there for over 50 years. It burned down in a forest fire in 1971. They never rebuilt it. I tried showing him the photo I'd taken when we arrived, but it was blank, just trees and empty space where the cabin should have been. Sometimes I dream about that place. The sound of the handle turning, the knock inside the walls, the faint glow of the embers. I tell myself I imagined it all, that Evan just left in the night. But then I remember the sound of breathing on the other side of the wood, so close it felt like it was in my own chest. And I still wonder, if that cabin was gone long before we got there, then what did we walk into that night? Story 4. The Radio in the Woods. It was 2 summers after the cabin, and I still couldn't shake the habit of camping alone. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe I was trying to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid. I had started hiking with an old handheld radio my dad gave me, the kind with static you could tune through endlessly, hoping to catch something. There was no signal that deep in the forest, but I liked the sound of the white noise. It filled the silence that usually made my skin crawl. That trip was supposed to be simple, just one night near the base of the ridge, close to a dry riverbed. I'd set up camp by dusk, lit a small fire, and was flipping through the static on my radio when something strange happened. Between the crackles and hums, I heard a voice. Faint, distant, like it was buried under 1,000 layers of noise. It wasn't music or a broadcast. It was a man, whispering something I couldn't make out. I tried adjusting the dial, but the more I tuned, the clearer it got. "Don't look for me," he said. Then silence. I sat there, frozen, the fire flickering low. I thought maybe it was a trucker frequency bleeding through, or an old transmission bouncing back from somewhere far away. But then, a minute later, it came again. The same voice, same words, only this time quieter. "Don't look for me." I shut the radio off, threw it in my bag, and tried to laugh it off. But that voice, it sounded close, like it had been recorded in the same air I was breathing. Later that night, I woke up to the static again. I hadn't turned the radio back on. It was lying next to me, glowing faintly, the dial spinning on its own. I reached for it, but before I could touch it, the speaker crackled, and I heard something new, a second voice. This one was whispering too, but it wasn't the same man. It was someone else, maybe a woman, crying quietly, saying a name over and over. My name. The sound faded into static. Then the same man's voice returned, more urgent this time. "Don't look for me, don't look for me, please." I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, clutching the radio like it might explode. The forest was dead quiet. No wind, no insects, no sound. But in the distance, faintly, I could hear what sounded like another radio. The same static, the same intermittent voices, echoing through the trees. I turned my device off completely, removed the batteries, but the noise kept going. That's when I saw the light. It flickered deep between the trees, not firelight, not a flashlight, just a pale, pulsing glow, like an old TV running on low power. I should have stayed put, but curiosity dragged me forward. Every few steps, the static would grow louder, almost rhythmic, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. The deeper I went, the stronger the light got, until I saw it. A small metal box half buried in the dirt, wires running from it into the ground. It looked old, decades old. But sitting on top of it, perfectly clean, was another radio, identical to mine. I picked it up without thinking. It was warm to the touch, and as soon as I did, it spoke. "You shouldn't have come back." I froze. The voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was clear, direct, my own voice, and silence. I dropped it, stumbled back, and the sound cut off. But when I turned to leave, I saw movement, shadows shifting between the trees, darting behind trunks just out of sight. I ran. I don't remember how far, how long, but by the time I reached my tent again, the sun was starting to rise. The radio was gone. I packed up everything and left without looking back. For weeks, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe some freak radio interference, some prank, something logical. But then, a month later, my dad called me into the garage. He was cleaning out some boxes, found the old radio he'd given me, said he didn't remember me ever taking it. I told him I had. He laughed and shook his head. "No," he said, "it's been here the whole time. The one I brought into the woods, the one that spoke to me, had vanished, just like Evan, just like the cabin. Sometimes when I'm driving at night and the signal cuts out, I'll hear faint static come through the car speakers. And buried somewhere inside that noise, for just a second, I swear I can hear it again, my own voice, whispering back to me. Sometimes I wonder if the voice was warning me or calling me. And if I'd stayed and listened long enough, would it have told me what it really wanted to say?